Brother Trevor and say, "Good evening, church." Appreciate your attendance this evening, and I don't know why I'm preaching tonight. Kyle didn't know why I was preaching tonight either, but I was scheduled to, so here we are. I hope you don't feel cheated by amateur hour tonight, but I hope that we have some important things to talk about and something that is beneficial in our walk with Christ and with our spiritual journey. As our brother just read the story there of Mary and Martha and sitting at Jesus' feet versus scurrying around trying to serve, trying to prepare, trying to do all these things. We see the contrast there, and I love this painting by Vermeer. That's a Dutch painter, Tim, not a hay baler. You see the contrast here between these two women and their approach to having Jesus in their home. And you see one is up and serving and hurrying around and probably in this moment asking Jesus, "Why will you not tell my sister to help me? Why will you not tell her to come and help me prepare all this?" While she is sitting at Jesus' feet, focused intently on the things that he has to say. And so this evening I want us to think about this idea of being anxious and troubled. Do you ever find yourself being anxious and troubled? I bet you do. I bet you do. I know I do. Anxious, troubled, distracted. Anxiety disorders are the second most common mental illness worldwide. Nearly 30% of adults experience one at some point, and around 4% experience them at any given time. Among Gen Z social media users, they check apps nearly 17 times a day. That number seems low to me, frankly. Averaging 2 to 3 hours per day, and many are left with attention spans under 8 seconds. The reason those little videos that are no longer just on TikTok but are on every social media app in the world are so short is because that's about how long a lot of us can pay attention to any given thing. 24-hour news, social media, constant communication, notifications from devices, all these things have fed into a cycle of anxiety and dismay. And there's no shortage of things for us to be concerned about, for us to be worried about. You can turn on the TV and you can watch 24-hour news coverage of all the horrible things that are happening around the world. And even closer, we can constantly be worried about the latest trends, the latest fashions, the latest things that are going on with our kids, the latest things that we need to be concerned about. We're constantly being fed all this information, and we're being asked to process more and more and more and more at any given time. And so there's no wonder that we're struggling with that. There's no wonder that we are anxious and troubled, and all these things are causing us to be distracted from the things that we need to be doing in serving the Lord. And so let's look a little bit more here at Mary and Martha and see what this story is about. We see Jesus' statement here, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things." And it's interesting to me that we don't know what all those many things were, but I don't think it was just the loaf of bread. I don't think it was just, and I'm saying that figuratively, we don't know what all she was preparing and what all she was doing. We don't know what all she was anxious and troubled about, but Jesus did. Jesus could see her heart, and he said, "You are troubled about many things." It may have been financial. It may have been just that moment, just trying to honor Christ in preparing some food and some drink for him and honoring this unbelievable guest that's in our home. And I can imagine all of us, if we had that opportunity, if the Lord himself entered our home as a guest, you think we wouldn't put out some refreshments? I think we would. I think we would put the concept of Southern hospitality to shame in that moment. But then we have that contrast of Martha, who's sitting down at Jesus' feet. She's not worried about lunch. She's not worried about if he's hungry. She's just sitting at his feet and listening. And so Martha wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't doing anything bad. She was serving Jesus. And yet, even in that moment, she's pulled away. Distractions can start with good intentions. They can start from a good place. They can start from an honest heart and still draw us away. So we've got to learn to focus. And we've got to learn to refocus daily. And with our attention spans, we've got to learn to refocus hourly, quarter hourly. We've got to learn to focus on Jesus. What are we anxious and troubled about? We're anxious and troubled about many things, just as she was. But let's look at Luke chapter 12, and beginning there in verse 22. This is the Lord speaking, and he says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on, for life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you're not able to do a small thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Considering the lilies, how they grow, they neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, and a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." And I think it's interesting when we read this passage, and we so often do, but we fail to go and look back just a little bit before that. Because if we go back to verses 13 through 15, we see here Jesus talking to the people in the crowd once again. But someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Does that sound like anybody else? It sounds just like Mary and Martha. Tell my brother, tell my sister. Why won't you tell her to help me? Why won't you tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me? But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" These are not the things that Christ is concerned with. These are not the things that Christ came to set right in the world. Mary and Martha, we see there in Luke chapter 10, verse 40. "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone?" I'm sure that person in the crowd is saying, "Lord, do you not care that my brother is being unfair to me?" Oh, some of you are like me. You have a couple of little kids around the house, and you hear these questions every day. "Daddy, he's not sharing. I want to sit on that side of the car. I had that first. He hit me." All these little things, all these little petty squabbles. And they're always, usually tilted a little bit, about who hit first and all those kinds of things. Do you not care? Luke chapter 12, beginning there in verse 28, again. "But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith?" Do we realize, do we forget that God made us, that God knows what we need? Are we silently asking, Lord, do you not care, when we worry and fret over the things that He's already taken care of, that He's already set into place? We pray and we thank God for His provision in one moment. And then in the next, we go and worry about what we're going to eat and drink and do and how we're going to spend our time. We are anxious and troubled about many things that God has already taken care of. We need to check our focus. And we're beginning to find this anxiety and this trouble in our lives, when we're distracted, we need to check our focus. Philippians chapter 4, and beginning in verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Where are we seeking peace? Where are we focusing our minds on to find peace? For so many today, it's in wealth. Can I acquire enough to be okay? And of course, we know that what is enough? Do we find it in some kind of status among the people around us? Whether it's, how many followers do I have on this app or that app? How many people, report to me at work? How many people think, my yard is the best one in the neighborhood? We find all these things to compete about, whether it's possessions, whether it's career, whatever it may be. We find all these things to worry about and fret over. But what would Solomon say about those things? We know what he would say about them. He would say that they are a striving after the wind, that it's just completely vacuous pursuit. That the only thing that's worth pursuing is God. Philippians chapter 4 and beginning in verse 8 says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Do you want peace? You're not going to find it in your 401k, because it's going to go up and down every day. And so many people are concerned with, is that number green? Is it red? What's going to happen tomorrow? The great thing about the God of peace, the great thing about these things that he's talking about, whatever's true, whatever's honorable, whatever's just, whatever's pure, is it does not change, just as the God of peace does not change. And so when we put our focus on God and godly things, that's where peace can be found. I read this somewhere, and I think it's very true, that anxiety often comes from trying to control things that God never asked us to. God has not given us the task of worrying about. We put it on ourselves. And so Mary chose the one necessary thing. Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet, to worship, to take this opportunity to be present in that moment. And Jesus commended her for that. In Psalm chapter 27, beginning in verse 1, a psalm of David says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, yet I will be confident. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. David, throughout his life, faced so many difficulties, so many challenges, so many hardships, from his days as a shepherd boy in the fields being attacked by wild animals, to his dealings with the Philistines, to Saul, and to all the things that came along as he was king of Israel. And what was it that gave him the strength to overcome Goliath? It was the same thing that gave him the strength to overcome all the other things, is that he focused on this one thing that he desired, was to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of his life. So he wasn't concerned about his enemies. He wasn't concerned about all these other things going on around him, because he felt the peace, he felt the protection of dwelling with God, and focused his attention on those things. And we know that when he strayed away from that, bad things happened. But because of his mentality that we see in that psalm, he quickly would return his focus to God. In John chapter 15 and beginning in verse 4, abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Another thing I love about this image of Mary and Martha is how close Mary wants to be to Jesus. She's not listening from another seat across the room. She's not, keeping her distance. And we read of a lot of people who had so much faith in Jesus that they knew that if they could just touch him, if they could just be close to him, that they could be healed, that they could be saved. In that same way, Mary wants that proximity to Jesus. She wants to sit at his feet. She doesn't want to miss a word of his teaching. And Jesus has told us that we need to abide in him, and that he will abide in us. That is where salvation is found. That is where strength is found. That is where power is found. And the way that we bear fruit is by being close to the branch. Do we want to be that near to Jesus? Do we want to be as close as possible, both spiritually and hopefully someday, not really physically, but in that new creation, whatever we want to call that? Is time with Jesus our first priority? Or is it what's left over? Is our proximity to Christ something that happens just by chance? Or is it something that we prioritize in our lives? Our priorities are going to shape our spiritual lives. In Colossians chapter 3 and beginning in verse 1, if then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God, and set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. What are we setting our minds on? What are we setting our focus on? What are we prioritizing in our lives? Martha let these physical things overtake this spiritual opportunity that she had. She was so concerned about setting the table and doing all these things that were maybe the cultural norms of the day for hospitality. She didn't realize that she had this opportunity to set all of that aside and just rest at the feet of Jesus and to listen and to learn. But Mary saw a spiritual opportunity that she couldn't refuse. Her priority was to just learn. And so what are we doing with the spiritual opportunities presented to us? I think often we don't pay attention to them. We don't see them, or we find them to be, something that we'll get to it. So often heard young people say, well, I can't really prioritize spiritual things right now. I've got to do this, and I've got to do that, while I'm young. I've got to get my education, and got to get, this business started. I've got to, start my family. I've got to do all these things. And then I'll get around to it. And, someday often doesn't come. Because there's always the next thing. There's always the next thing to focus on. There's always more distractions and more things that pull us away from God. There's always more things to do. There's always more things to place our time and attention on. And the farther we stay away from God, the more we forget what we've lost. So these distractions that come into our lives, they have to be mastered. Both the sinful distractions and, I don't want to call them good distractions, because if they were good, they wouldn't be distractions. Let's call them the non-sinful distractions, even though that sounds like way too technical of a term. The sinful distractions that come into our lives. Hebrews chapter 12, beginning of verse 1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." And understand that phrase there, because we are surrounded by this cloud of witnesses. What does that mean? What is that about? What is this cloud of witnesses telling us? It's telling us that it can be done. We have this cloud of witnesses. We have these people written about in Scripture who were faithful to God. And we can be too. Yes, it's a difficult road. Yes, there are going to be trials and tribulations and problems. There are going to be distractions. But it can be done if we cling closer to God than, as it says here, sin is clinging or trying to cling to us. Sin dulls our sensitivity to God. It dulls our sensitivity to itself. It consumes our attention to the point that we forget what it is that we're doing wrong, what it is that we're failing at, what it is that we've replaced with these sinful things. Lust, greed, pride, all these things come into our lives. They're natural reactions to the things that we see and hear and deal with all around us. But God is offering us a better way. Jesus taught that all these things were just because they're commonplace in the world doesn't mean that they have a place in spiritual people's lives, in his followers' lives. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 28, he says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." The world sets a standard of sin that's way down here. And it gives us room to say, well, I didn't do that. God says, no. What is your heart doing? In Luke chapter 12 and verse 15, he says, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness." This is going back to that passage we read earlier where the man said, "Teacher, tell the brother to divide the inheritance with me." This seems like a perfectly cut and dry, this is a legal issue. This is my right. Jesus said, watch out for covetousness. Because just because it's your right doesn't mean it's worth breaking up your family over. Doesn't mean it's worth the hurt and the hard feelings that you're trying to create. James chapter 4 and verse 6, "But he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." What are we seeking in our lives? Are we seeking to ride the line between good and evil and trying to get as much of the world we can and still kind of at least be able to see the light of the Lord off in a distance? Or are we trying to run as fast as we can from the darkness? But there are things that distract us that maybe aren't sinful things, just as with Mary and Martha. In Luke chapter 14, in verse 16, Jesus tells a parable here. He says, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' And so the servant went and reported these things to his master, and the master of the house became angry." And I want to stop right there for a moment, and I want us to think about these things that these people made excuses of. Basically, to summarize it, we had 2 that bought property sight unseen and needed to go look at it, and 1 who got married and thought that his wife wouldn't want to go get dressed up and go to a banquet. Now, all of these things I think are interesting, but none of them are sinful. None of these things are sinful that these people were buying and selling property, that they were getting married. These are all perfectly fine things. But what did they miss? They missed what this was all about. They missed this opportunity to go and honor this master, to honor this person who had invited them to this great feast. And so the master said to the servant, "Go out and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame." And then he said, "Go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in so that my house may be filled. For none of these men who are invited shall taste my banquet." And of course, we understand this is a parable of heaven, that those who fail to understand the value of heaven, who fail to understand the glory of eternity with God versus these temporal things in this life, will not be worthy of the things that God has offered us. And so, yes, our families, our jobs, even serving in the church and serving others in our community, hobbies, sports, activities, recreation, all these things are good. There's nothing wrong with any of those things in and of themselves, but they have to be secondary. They have to be in their place. In Romans chapter 12, and beginning in verse 1 says, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." So often we focus on, I'm not doing anything sinful. So, am I not a living sacrifice? But we can still avoid out and out sin, but not give God his due, not give spiritual things their proper place. It's not merely about sin, but it's about what kind of fruit are we producing? Because we can be dead and still think that we're Christians. We can come to church every Sunday and every Wednesday and go to all the Bible studies and do all those things, but not produce any fruit. Because we're not allowing spiritual things. We're not renewing our minds to discern the will of God. So let's think about a few quick things. How can we refocus our minds on Jesus? I think one of the first things that we need to try to do is to cultivate quiet and intentional time. In Mark chapter 1, verse 35, Jesus rose early to be with God. He says there, "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed." Jesus, if Jesus needs time to go out and to pray and to focus and to prepare himself to do the things that he needed to do, what on earth, what foolishness is it that makes us think that we don't. That we don't need time to focus our minds, to focus our hearts, to be still and pay attention to God. It is pure arrogance to think that we don't need that. We need to protect the time that we have to devote ourselves to prayer and study like we would. We probably protect our dentist appointments in our calendars better than we do our time of prayer and devotion to God. We need to rest. In Exodus chapter 20, in verse 8, the Lord said, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates." Jesus commanded Israel to be resting. Yes, there's 6 days that you work, just as in the creation, but you need to rest. And so he required them to rest. And was this just because, these Israelites are just working too hard? There's an aspect of that maybe. But I don't think this is just about physical rest. This is about mental rest, and this is about spiritual rest. And just because we are free from the Sabbath law doesn't mean that we don't need rest. It doesn't mean that we're somehow special and don't need rest. We absolutely need to take time, as Psalm 46 and verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on the earth." We need to be still. We need to be still and let God work in us. Let his word work in us. Let prayer take away the distractions and the anxieties and the troubles and cares of this life and give them over to him. We also need to evaluate our commitments. What fills our schedule? What is God actually asking of us? In Ephesians chapter 5 and beginning in verse 15, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." As we've said, whether it's preaching and teaching, hobbies, sports, recreation, even family time, we have to make sure that we are putting first things first. We have to make sure that we are teaching our children by our example and by the things that we do, that no matter what it is we're doing, whether it's work or play, that Christ is at the center of it. That there is something spiritual about everything that we do. Because we need to understand, and we need our children to understand, and we need that those that we encounter and that we influence to understand that there is a good portion that will not be taken away. Jesus gently corrected Martha. And I think this is maybe the gentlest rebuke in all of Jesus' ministry. He didn't rebuke her for working, but he rebuked her a little bit for worrying over things that were not important in that moment. There were certainly other times that Jesus was honored, and he accepted that, and he received those things. But in this moment, he realized that Martha needed to be reminded that he wasn't going to be with them physically for very much longer, and that she had an opportunity she needed to take advantage of. And we need to constantly realign our lives, realign our attitudes and our focus and our priorities to sit at the feet of Jesus. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 3, "But I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. We need to remember that there is one prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking to devour us. And he knows how to deceive us. He knows what it is that we can be fooled by, that we can be consumed by. And it may be something that is perfectly innocent in and of itself, but can still be used by him to pull us away. So what is distracting you from Jesus right now? Is it something sinful? Or is it something that's good but maybe out of place? Focus on him. Let's focus on the opportunities that we have to study and to pray, to let go of the things of this world, to cultivate quiet time with our Lord, to rest in his promises, and to commit ourselves to living and serving in holy ways. I'll leave you with this passage from Psalm 16, verse 11. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. If you wish to have that, if you wish to have that fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore, Jesus is the only path to that. God is the only one who can give you that peace that passes understanding. He's the only one who can give us true and complete rest. And so this evening, whatever is distracting you from your service to God, whatever is distracting you from being his child, I hope that you will come forward and let us help you put those things away while there's time and opportunity. Come forward as we stand and sing.